All right, so it's good to see everybody. Even Reb Chunya, no, especially Reb Chunya. Reb Chunya, good to see you. And Adam and Beth, Mr. David and Michael. All right, good to see everybody. So let me switch over from okay. So I'm really excited because we're really embarking on a new section of the Tanya. It's almost like the Chumash, if you're not familiar with the Chumash, it looks like just one long book of instruction, which of course it is, but there are, of course, separate elements to it. There's the Genesis stories, and there's the Exodus stories, then there's the building of the Mishkan, then there's the service in the Mishkan, the book of Leviticus, then the book of Numbers has a couple sections over there as well with stories, and then Deuteronomy is like a long sermon, my favorite part, of course. But so there's really very different sections. And the same thing is really with the Tanya. There's different sections. And of course, if you study it many times, you eventually get familiar with the sections. And then the idea is that you can look up in the section when you're, in addition to obviously constantly studying, you could look up at the specific section that you need help with. So with that being said, we're now going to start a section here in chapter 18, which deviates from what we've been done before. And one thing I want to say about the Tanya, as I've said many times, the Tanya is not a book of how, but a book of what. And what I mean by that is the Tanya really tells you what you should do. In other words, what you need to do to serve God. What's your makeup? How are you made out of? What's going to be the best? How do you find meaning in your service of God? But the actual service of God is expounded upon in other books of Hasidus more at length, or the books of meditation on God or whatever, or books of halacha. So it's a manual, but it's not a cookbook, right? So let's say you have your manual for your oven, tells you how your oven operates, but it doesn't actually give you a cake recipe. Maybe today they do, but it doesn't give you a cake recipe. It tells you how you got to turn the oven and how you can operate the things in the oven, and if you want to cook at 400 or 300 or whatever it is. The same thing as the Tanya, really, although of course it does get into the practical, but in reality, the practical that the Tanya gives us is shorthand, because again, it's the guidebook. It's telling you how you should operate your life. Then, of course, you got to operate. For example, the Tanya talks a lot about studying of Torah, but it's not actually, it's not actually telling, it's not actually a book of Torah study per se. Although, of course, we do call it Torah study, but it's telling you to study Torah, right? The same thing. It tells you to do many mitzvahs, and it tells you the meaning behind the mitzvahs, but it's not the actual mitzvahs. So one can study the whole Tanya and really not do anything, is, I guess, really my point. That's unlikely because the Tanya is very inspiring, but we always have to remember the Tanya is the book of what we're meant to do, and all of that. So with that being said, the chapters until now, as we said, chapter 1 to 12 or to 11 really set the stage of what our inner makeup. And then from chapter 12 through chapter 17 gave us what's known as the long way. You may have heard of what's called the longer, shorter way, or the shorter, longer way. We spoke about it in the beginning of the Tanya. What it generally means is that, and I'm going to turn off the light behind me, it looks distracting. What it generally means, that's a little better, but I've got to figure out the glare behind me. Okay. But what it generally means is that in life, we have two paths, generally. We can take the shortcut. The problem with the shortcut is that shortcuts inevitably leave you shortcutted, okay? They get you somewhere quickly, but not very well. So for example, you might see there's a piano behind me. You might find on YouTube all these different, there's ads that show up on my YouTube recently, learn to play 100 songs an hour. I would call that a shortcut. Now, I haven't clicked on it, but that's a shortcut. You might be able to play, 100 songs an hour, but you're not really gonna properly know how to play piano. To properly play piano, you got to take lessons week in and week out. Just so you know, it's not me taking lessons, it's Menachem. But I don't know how to, I learned how to play recorder in elementary for a little bit, and that's it. That's the extent of my musical instrument playing. So the, so you can learn to play properly. That's called the longer way. Or you can learn shortcuts, hacks. And hacks will get you somewhere quickly. But they'll be lacking. And it first of all doesn't have as great long-term success, and you might have some issues down the line. So the example that's given in many of the books about the shorter, longer way, it says one time a man was going on a journey and he wanted to get to a certain city, and he stopped a wise person and said, how do I get to the city? So he told him, you can go to the right for the shorter, longer way, or to the left for the longer, shorter way. So he took the right, he took the shorter, longer way. So he took the shorter, longer way, he started walking, a very quick road. Soon he was at the outskirts of the city, but then there was a giant wall that he would have to scale. He wasn't a young man, he couldn't scale the wall, so he had to go back. And then he took the longer, shorter way. It was a longer path, but you got there safe and sound and easily. It's like if anybody goes to Jerusalem, if you want to go to the Western Wall, sometimes from Mamilla, you can take the shorter way through the Arab Shuk, but you have to be willing to take that risk. Or you can take the longer way, goes a little bit around, but you feel very safe taking that road. So the same thing as the Tanya here gave us so far, the long way. The long game is you study about God, you meditate about God, you change your mindset, you change your feelings. And he spoke about even in scenarios where your feelings don't change, don't worry about it because you can't fully control your feelings. But the general idea was to work on creating and building emotion through your mind. And despite it being hard, it's still possible and within everybody's reach, as he explained, because it's not demanded of us to create emotion. We just have to at least try. The problem is that, I'll give you one problem with that scenario. The problem is sometimes a person is facing a challenge, facing a test, and you don't have the time to take the longer route. Sometimes there's just simply not the time, okay? Let's say you didn't have the time to meditate that day, and right now you need to dig deep within yourself to find the inspiration to do what needs to be done, because you don't want to do the wrong thing, but you're not inspired enough. Remember how I said before that a lot of it goes in the desire, right? There's desire. The most important thing is desire. So, but we're saying, even assuming you have a desire to do the right thing, now what if it's very difficult? What do you do then? If you're short on time, so to speak. So the answer that chapter 18 is going to give, 18 and on, is there's another type of love to God that is not created through your mind, but is actually found deep within you. Okay? It's actually found deep within you. And what we call, anybody heard of the Jewish heart? Right? Anybody heard of the Jewish heart? I'm sure you've heard of the Jewish heart. That's what people call colloquially the Jewish heart. Deep within each and every single one of us is a Jewish heart. And we have the ability, very quickly, if we know certain methods, as the Tanya is going to explain, to uncover our hidden love to God. And when we do that, we can, and when we do that and uncover our hidden love, then we have the ability to overcome the challenges that face us. So the questions that we're going to ask today, or that we're going to have to ask over the next couple of weeks, is how, first of all, where does this love come from, and how do we reach it? How do we reach it? And so there's Tanya. It's going to be a long answer. It's interesting. I'm saying there's a quicker path to reach your love, but it's actually a more complicated path. It sounds strange, right? The shortcut is more complicated. What I mean by that is that it's not like obvious, okay? It's obvious that if you meditate, contemplate, you will generally create some emotional bond or connection. Finding the hidden love is a little more complicated, okay? Once you know how to do it, it makes a lot of sense. But to an extent, it's a little complicated, so it's actually going to take him a couple chapters to explain it. So in chapter 18 and 19, so I'm giving you the map. Chapter 18 and 19, we're going to talk about the hidden love. We're going to talk about what it is and how it works. In chapter 20 through 22, we're going to learn about God's oneness in the world. how God is one with the world. And we're going to study that for a very specific reason. It's very much connected to your hidden love. It understanding that helps your hidden love. In chapter 23 and 24, we're going to explain the difference between a sin and a mitzvah, and how every single mitzvah connects you to God, and every single sin disconnects you from God. And that, again, would be a build-off of chapter 20 and 22, which spoke about the oneness of God. And then we end off this whole section in chapter 25, that based on this, we will understand why it is very close and near for each and every single one of us to bring out this hidden love. Once we build up the whole thing, the culmination of it is in chapter 25. Okay, so you might say, Rabbi, am I going to remember by the time I get to chapter 25? So I think any of you who have been here for a while know that the way we study the Tanya, it's a beautiful thing. There is a general theme he's trying to bring in every single class. Every single section has lessons that we can walk away with for that day, for that time in our lives. And so, yes, it's a long-winded answer, but so is the Tanya until now. So chapter 18 to 25 is its own section. This is true. But along the way, we will gather a bunch of great, great items. All right, someone wrote here that I get too busy inspiring everyone else and forget to get inspired. It's interesting. In Jewish philosophy, we talk about there's two types of way to inspire people. There's two types of ways to affect others, to give over to others, to teach others. One way is like a juice bottle, okay? If I want to put orange juice in a cup, I pour the orange juice into the cup. Whatever orange juice I poured into the cup is missing from the bottle. Now it's in the cup. Then there's another way. It's called fire, for example. If you have the shamash candle, when the shamash candle lights the other candles, it does not lose its fire. It maintains and it only adds light into the world. And so it's explained in our lives, we have sometimes the ability to give to others in ways that takes away from us. Let's say time. Time is a very difficult thing. Sometimes when we give away our time, we might be giving it away to somebody else. Although it's not necessarily true, as I'll explain in a moment. But then there are times where we give to others and we are not losing, where we are not, in fact, when we teach others, we gain. Sometimes when we give to others, it inspires us more. For example, these Tanya classes. Does it take my time? Sure, it does take my time. But am I delving deeply into the Tanya, and do I have to delve deeper myself to understand it greater than I have before because I'm teaching it at a very slow pace? 100%. So I'm giving of my time, but I'm definitely gaining and growing. I want to say one more thing is the Rabbi used to quote often. It says, somebody who teaches someone else, their mind becomes sharper. What that means is that what maybe would have taken you 50, it says 1,000 times. So it means what would have taken you 1,000 hours to understand will now take you 1 hour. Now, the way I understand it is the clarity of mind. When we take our time to teach others, God blesses us with a greater clarity of mind. It could be also memory, I'm not sure. But it says your mind becomes zaka, becomes clear. So you get a certain clarity in your studies and in your work, in your personal work. And so if you have the clarity, anything you need to do takes a lot quicker. So that's just to that question about inspiring others. So go out there and inspire others, and God will give you lots of clarity. Okay. So with that, I think we're ready to delve into the actual chapter over here, chapter 18. So if you have the book, it'll be page 210. Okay. Just to tell a story of the Jewish heart. They tell a story of Mendel Futterfass. Mendel Futterfass was a famous Chabad Chassid, and there's a famous story of him. He was one time on an airplane, and he was trying to convince someone to put on tefillin, but he only spoke Russian and Hebrew, and this person was American. So finally, he told the person, I Jew, you Jew, I tefillin, you tefillin, and the person put on tefillin. And what that idea tells us is that the heart of a Jew is not necessarily connected or tied into a language and eloquent explanations. Sometimes we get inspired by I Jew, you Jew, right? And that's the truth, is that we tend to think in this world that the mind is everything, that the only way to inspiration is through the mind. And so what we're learning now in these chapters is something that we know to be true, but we don't necessarily think of it, and the scientific world may not believe in it either. I'm not sure. I'm not that into the sciences, but this idea that there's a latent inner goodness to people that we can tap into, and we don't always need to inspire them in a direct manner. I don't always need to explain to people what they need to do. Sometimes we need to just do it. That's, kind of I always say Chabad is both a philosophy and a movement. That's kind of the idea behind the whole, mitzvah campaigns, where the Rebbe would just, get people to put on film, like Shabbat candles, keep kosher, get people to do practical mitzvahs. We don't need to wait till we explain it to them. Sometimes people can start because they have the Jewish heart, and then they come to understand it later. And this is all based on this idea that we believe that there is such a thing as a Jewish heart. But now we're going to discover, although you already probably are familiar with the Jewish heart, today we're going to actually go into a clinical, let's say, a clinical discovery of the Jewish heart, right? So typically we know there's a Jewish heart. Nobody ever really looks into it. Today we're going to go into a clinical study of the Jewish heart. Like, how does it work? Where is it coming from? So let's take a look here at the text. Okay. All right, in chapter 17 again, which, as I said a moment ago, is the end of the last section. The Tanya explains that observing commandments is within reach and easily accessible for anyone who has a brain in his head, which maybe we could say is not everybody. No, I'm kidding. This is because you can think about whatever you want. And if you think about the greatness of the Blessed Infinite One, you will inevitably generate, at least in your mind, a love for God sufficient to inspire you to attach yourself to Him through the practical observance of the mitzvahs. And that was last chapter, page 204, right? Sounds pretty straightforward. Study about God, meditate about God, love for God. But this merely explains why the goal is generally within reach and achievable. We have yet to clarify why it is very much within reach. So to further understand with clarity the word ma'od, very much, in the verse discussed in chapter 17, rather the thing is very much within reach for you in your mouth and in your heart so that you can do it, referring to the mitzvahs, you need to have a profound recognition of the following idea. So what he's basically saying is like this. We understand that the whole idea of contemplating, meditating about God, and then creating emotions means that connecting to God through your mind and then your heart is within reach. But it's not always very much within your reach. So that's why he's going to come with a second paradigm, that sometimes we need to use our hidden love, and that makes it very much within reach at any single moment. All right, he says like this. Up to this point in the Tanya, our emphasis has been on coming close to God through the mind work. This path was depicted as within reach and easily accessible, since inherently and naturally the brain rules over the heart. And again, that was, we hammered that over and over. The brain rules over the heart. In the following chapters, the Tanya will present us with another, even easier path to worship, which is very much within reach, in contrast to the previous path, which required you to acquire an awareness of God within your mind. This new path will be based on a quality already present in your soul that merely needs to be unveiled. So that's great. I don't need to go somewhere. I can find it in my heart. There's the video I could probably show. Maybe I'll show it at the end. A powerful video about God being in your heart. Anyways, okay. So let's continue. I'm still here. Okay. It says my internet connection is unstable. Okay. For even if your mind is weak when it comes to the mental appreciation of God, and an understanding of the Blessed Infinite One's greatness is beyond your heart's capacity, and I might add, or maybe your mind is bamboozled with text messages and email and WhatsApps and Facebook Messenger and Instagram, and so your mind is now weak or distracted. Even if you're not naturally weak, maybe in today's society you become weak, and you fail to develop enough intellectual appreciation of God to even generate a mere discernment of love and reverence in your mind, as we discussed in chapter 16. Right? So in other words, you don't even have the concentration to not only not create emotions, but even in your mind, you're not even getting to a deep understanding, right? We said last time, to promise emotions is difficult, but at the very least, your mind should come to a deep understanding. No, you're so distracted, you can't even get there. So I'm sure some of us can relate to that. So he's telling us good news. Nevertheless, despite the failure of your meditation efforts, it still remains true that this is very much within reach for you, to carefully observe all the mitzvahs of the Torah, including the study of the Torah, which is equal to all of them, in your mouth and in your heart, literally from the genuine depths of your heart with reverence and love, if you follow the second approach below. So he's telling you good news, alert, even if you're distracted, there is another path to connect with God, as we said, is going to be the hidden love. I want to point out one thing here, in that part of the reason why many of us have trouble contemplating, thinking about God, is we're distracted. That is why historically, Hasidic Jews on Shabbat would pray longer. It would be a day of the week in which even people who were distracted the whole week had time to think and meditate. So Shabbat is a time when your phone is off, when you're not distracted. Shabbat is a great time to at least once a week spend time to meditate and contemplate about God. In fact, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, I believe, put out a ruling that he sent spies out to all of his communities, to his followers, people who claim to be his followers, deep, great individuals. And he told them, if my spies come back and they say that you are not spending time, at the very least on Shabbat, praying at length and meditating, don't bother coming in. Again, we're talking about a different era. It's not like the era of the lost generation of today. We're talking about people back then. They were religious. They were connected. They were in. And they, and then they would come to the Alter Rebbe to ask for help in their divine service of God. And Alter Rebbe would say, if I can only help those who help themselves. You know what I mean? Like, don't waste my time. Like, if you're not going to put in the work, don't come complaining to me. Again, it's an approach for that generation. Don't put it in our generation. We're kind of a very different generation, but you're getting the idea that he used to say, at the very least, maybe the longer path is not available for you every single day, but on Shabbat, take that time. So taking it to ourselves, to some extent, we can do the same as well. That on Shabbat, when our minds are less distracted, we should each spend a little bit of time, at the very least, in meditation, prayer, and study. Okay, so let's continue. In chapter 16, we learned that if your meditation fails to produce palpable emotion and only gives rise to vague, and I'm going to read this again, even if it's repetitious for you, because I don't know about you, but repetition always helps us remember, which is a good thing. Only gives rise to a vague discernment in your mind and in the hidden places of your heart, that's okay. Since most people can presumably do at least that, we conclude in chapter 17 that observing the commandment is within your reach. But what if your meditation fails completely? And how does he define failed meditation? You just can't concentrate enough to generate a vague discernment of God's greatness or even muted feelings for God. The Tanya reassures us of another approach to attain love and reverence for God, not through mindful meditation, and this is a path available literally to everyone. To discern God through meditation is within reach, but this second approach will be easier and more universally applicable. It is very much within reach. These two paths are alluded to in the author's title page as the long way and the short way. That's what I explained earlier. Contemplating God's greatness, which takes time and patience, is the long way, depicted up to chapter 17. The second, easier approach described in chapters 18 to 25 is the short way. All right, so what is the shorter way? It's getting to the love that is within the heart of the Jew. So let us read. This second approach involves a dormant love found in the heart of all Israel. Now, he doesn't say just a dormant, godly soul. Okay? It's taking a step further. There's a dormant love. There's a dormant love to God. There is a dormant love of God already present in your soul. You merely need to awaken it. This is very much within reach because we are speaking about something you already have, an innate property of your psyche. And as he continues, so how did I get it, right? So again, if we say that you have a dormant love, well, where did I get it from? So he explains. He's going to give us the intellectual explanation where we got this from. So he says, it is an inheritance to us from our patriarchs. So the Tanya describes dormant love as an inheritance to stress that it is not something that you have earned through your own merits. It is something which you were born with because you are a descendant of the patriarchs. Now, it's a very strange line. Inheritance you generally cannot give an inheritance of feelings, right? Even religion or anything, right? You can give money, you can give wealth, but how can I, even if I, if I was a musician, let's say, I can't give that over to my children. They have to learn it themselves. What is this whole thing of that we inherit a feeling? How is that possible? He's going to have to explain. He will explain. Let's continue. Next page. Now he's going to say something. While the Tanya refers to the patriarchs in general as bequeathing us a dormant love, it is Abraham in particular, who is associated with the traits of love and kindness. Right? Everybody's familiar. Abraham, the man with a tent, he always was open for guests. We see that he clearly was a man of kindness. Let's continue. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were each given a particular power corresponding to their actions. Abraham performed acts of kindness. He prepared food for everyone in his area and for all the wayfarers. He acted kindly and went out to greet them, as it is written, and he ran to greet them, referring to the angels. God therefore granted him the same measure and gave him the attribute of kindness. So again, all the patriarchs and matriarchs had love, awe of God, but some had a more dormant. It says that Isaac was more of the awe of God, and Jacob was a synthesis of the two. So again, they all gave us love, but Abraham in particular, we see the stress on love. But as he asks here, but how exactly do you inherit love? Why is it described as dormant? And how might you bring it to a conscious experience? So we have three questions here. He wrote it very quickly, so you might miss it. Three questions that Tanya is going to have to answer. How do you inherit love? That's the question I asked before. I mean, how can you give someone a feeling? Why is it described as dormant? And obviously you'll learn the answer is that unless you reveal it, it's there, but it's hidden. And how might you bring it to a conscious experience? And that's something we're going to have to find out, right? Even if I know it's there, how do I get it? For the remainder of this chapter and in the following chapters, the Tanya will address these issues. Chapter 18 and 19 will address these issues. So he says like this. Only we must first offer an introductory explanation to clarify four issues pertaining to inherited dormant love. A, the root of this love, because it doesn't flow from the mind to the heart. How does it come to you? Right? That's generally, love has to start in the mind. B, its defining property. How does it differ from other forms of love, right? In other words, if it's the same exact love that comes through meditation, then why bother with meditation, right? So we want to know, what does this love look like that makes it different, which therefore it's not our first choice of love, but of course it works as well. C, how is it on our inheritance, as I explained. And D, how it also includes an inherent capacity for reverence as well as love. As we've explained in previous chapters, we need to have both love and reverence of God. Therefore, we will have to understand, if we're calling this the shorter path, this shorter path must include not only love, but also awe of God. Before I go to section 2, I'm going to open up if anybody has any questions or comments. It's a good breaking point before we get to section 2. We kind of have a general idea here. There is such a thing as a dormant love, but we don't understand anything about it. Anybody? Yes.
So we're basically trying to think about how we can feel more connected to Hashem, really.
Yes. That's the goal, because serving God requires a feeling. And both from a practical perspective, it's easier to do the right thing when you have a feeling towards God. And number two, God wants kavanah, he wants intention, he wants emotion infused into those actions, so that those actions are even more connected to God. In the later chapters of the Tanya, just 1 second, and I'll get back to you. Later chapters of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe will explain at length why love and awe is necessary, not just from a practical perspective, but from a spiritual perspective. But yes, continue.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I think we have to backtrack to alleviating some of us with our doubt, but that's okay. I could pray about my doubt, right? That's a good way to do it. Pray to God about it.
What do you mean doubt? You're saying doubts about God?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the good news is that if you have doubts about God, the next couple chapters will deal with that. Not necessarily was its straight up intention, but it will cover that.
Okay, perfect. I have a client at 12:45. I'm waiting. Thank you. I'm
All
ready.
right, don't worry. I'm not going to finish it all today, So we're not going to, we're going to have to get it over the next bunch of weeks as we cover these chapters. But these chapters will deal with people who are struggling with their faith. Because again, if we're talking about a dormant love, that means even if you're struggling with faith, you have this there. And the Tanya is going to tell you how you access it. So,
all right, thank you.
Yep, you're
Perfect.
welcome. And as always, everything's recorded. So if you miss any sections, you can always get it. But that's a great question, right? We're studying this whole Tanya. What if we have doubts? Well, you're in luck because the next couple chapters will cover, maybe it wasn't the straight up intention, but it will cover places where we have doubts. Anybody else has a question before we move on? No? I see nobody asked me, Rabbi, where's the joke today? But okay. I guess you'll be okay without that. Okay, so let's continue. Let's continue along over here. Okay. Inheriting emotion. So to answer question C, remember, we started off, we want to understand what is this dormant love? What does it even mean? How do you inherit love? So he explains like this. He says, the Midrash teaches that the patriarchs were genuinely a chariot to God. Now, what does it mean to be a chariot to God? So he's going to explain. Ramban, Nachmanides, that is, writes of the patriarchs, their thoughts were never detached from the supernal light, even for one moment. Their dedication to God was comparable to a physical chariot that never deviates to the right or to the left of its own accord and follows its driver with relentless precision. In Jewish teachings, a chariot is the highest compliment. That means that one completely follows all of God's will. Just as a chariot literally has no mind, only goes where the rider and of course the horses are leading it to. The patriarchs, the matriarchs, any of the greatest of the greats, and I'm saying the greatest of the greats, okay? The greatest of the greats never deviated, and therefore they are considered chariots to God's will. Okay, so that's very special. Let's turn to the next page. And of course, the grass people are around, so if you hear some noise, sorry about that. So let's continue. So as you can imagine, I should get one of these days, one of these headphone things. Would probably help all of you. Anyways, he says like this. As a result, they merited that their future descendants would forever be endowed with the soul powers of Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama from one of the 10 holy Sephiros. So let's read what this means. You probably got lost on that, as I did. The patriarchs' reward for their outstanding devotion to God was that their descendants' soul would be sourced in a holy energy. So again, because the patriarchs were so devoted to God, God gave them a reward. That their descendants' souls would be rooted in a very holy energy. In one of his discourses, Rabbi Shneur Zalman clarifies this idea through the Talmud's comment on the verse in Daniel. I, Daniel, alone saw the mystical vision. The men that were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, so that they fled to them to hide themselves. So what that's referring to, in case you don't know what it is, in the book of Daniel, what he was saying was, I had a vision. Now, Daniel was a prophet, so Daniel would see the vision of God. But nobody else had that vision. But they felt it. They felt it. And therefore, they felt trembling. This is, by the way, a general thing. It's not that God is invisible. It's that we can't see God. Our eyes it cannot see God. It's like the same thing. We cannot hear radio waves. It doesn't mean radio waves don't exist just because I don't hear them. My ears are not attuned to pick up radio waves. Same thing. God is all around. When a prophet would see God, doesn't mean nobody else could have seen God. Just that they don't have the vision. They don't have the ability with their physical eyes to see God. But what it's saying here is sometimes even when you don't see, you can feel. So the Talmud continues. The Talmud asks, and if these men did not see the vision, why did they flee trembling? And the Talmud answers, because even though they did not see it, their mazalot saw it. Mazal. Mazal we generally translate as luck, but mazal means a lot more than that. Let's read over here, and then I'll explain to you the word mazel. Rabbi Schneur Zalman translates the term mazalot to mean the root of the soul which is not enmeshed in the body, but it flashes and shines into the chachma of the divine soul which is enmeshed in the body. The mazal literally sees, and there is no way of deviating from God, and communicates this subliminally to the conscious mind. So again, what this means is that we have a godly soul. And it's complicated, but not all of our godly soul actually manifests in our body. Our godly soul is made up of, is multi-layered. Some of those layers are not manifest in our body. And those layers that are not manifest in our body are nevertheless connected with the part of our soul that's in our body. So your mazal is the part of your soul that is outside of your body. And when you have good mazal, it shines from the soul that's outside of your body to the soul that's inside of your body. So that's what it means over here, is even though the people did not see God, the part of their soul that was outside of their body did see God. And by virtue of that, they felt something in their body. I just want to focus on that for a moment. That's sometimes what we mean. People should have good mazel, something should drip. Mazel also means to drip. There should be a dripping of goodness from heaven. But if you've ever experienced a sudden awakenedness to God, you've suddenly woken up to want to feel connected to God. The Hasidic teachers tell us that what it means is there was maybe a heavenly voice that rang out in the world. You didn't hear it because you couldn't hear it, but a part of your soul did hear it, and it now passed it down to your body. And so that explains sudden inspiration that we sometimes get. So what's interesting here is that our feelings can sometimes pick up, this is already some interesting thing. We're already getting an inkling of an answer. Sometimes our feelings can pick up something that did not start in our mind, right? Because our eyes go to our mind, which then go to our heart. Here, we found a way to short that circuit. I don't know if that's the right word, but we found a way to get around that, okay? Instead of you going from the eyes to the mind to the heart, right? You don't have to read something or hear something, right? Usually the eyes and the ears are they are usually the conduits for knowledge that comes into our body, which gets into our mind and comes to our heart. But here we found another way to get something into your body. And that is by virtue of the soul that's not within your body. By virtue of the part of your soul that's not within your body, it can hit the part of your soul that is within your body. And so that is a way to circumvent the mind. So you're already getting part of the answer, but let's continue. As a chariot to God, the patriarchs experienced a conscious awareness of God. So again, they did work through their mind. Therefore, they merited too that their future descendants would forever be endowed with lofty souls, which would have at least a subconscious experience of their mazal of seeing the divine. In other words, because the patriarchs had such a high level of conscious connection with God, God gave a gift that we would always have a soul that could give us a subconscious connection to God. That's a gift, that there's a part of our soul that's outside of our body that can give us a feeling of connection to God. The immediacy of God's presence, which the patriarchs experienced consciously, would be experienced by their descendants subconsciously. So again, for God to give us the consciousness, that would be too much cheating, So God gave a gift, but he didn't want to cheat over here. So he says, I'll give you the feeling of God, but it'll be subconscious. But he's going to say something here, something very important, which we touched upon in chapter 2, and that is that even though we all have a godly soul, and there's a part of our godly soul that's outside of our body that could be connected to our soul subconsciously and make us feel connected to God, nevertheless, not everybody's soul is going to feel it the same. And that's something we spoke about in chapter 2. And when we spoke about chapter 2, I explained that's why we see some people are naturally more spiritual than others. And it's not necessarily their upbringing or anything else. It could literally be the soul, and we spoke about the gestation period that God gave them. So we'll read here. It'll give you a short, so to speak, a short of chapter 2. But if you want to remember that, you'll have to look more at chapter 2. But let's read. However, this does not mean that all the souls of Israel are equal, since each soul might be associated with any one of the 10 holy sphirot, as they are found in any one of the 4 spiritual worlds: Atzilut, emanation; Bria, creation; Yitzir, formation; Asiya, action. So he's going to give an explanation here. If I don't like the explanation, I'll explain it myself, what this means. The Kabbalah teaches that in the spiritual realms, there is a hierarchy of worlds, and a soul might emanate from any one of them. For example, there are people whose nefesh is from Malchus of Asiya, and others who are from Yesod of Asiya. A higher soul from the higher sphere or world will find it easier to be aware of God and meditation upon his greatness. A soul emanating from the lower location will find it more challenging. Okay, so I didn't necessarily like that explanation. So let me just explain it in short, and I'm going to try and pull up here maybe some type of image. Yeah, let's pull up this. I'm not sure. Let me see if you're seeing this, or what are you seeing? Yeah, okay, so you're seeing this. Okay. Open an image in a new tab. Okay. So we've explained that, and this is not very big, so maybe I'll have to zoom in, right? So we've explained in previous classes, and I don't know where this is from, but I'm just pulling one random one up. We've explained in previous classes that there's a concept called the 4 worlds. God creates this world, and there are 4 worlds, which I might call 4 levels of consciousness. Well, God has many stages of creation of the world, but we are taught about specifically the last 4 worlds. The last 4 worlds is the world of emanation, the world of creation, the world of formation, and the world of actuality. So all of those, as time goes on, they become more independent. That's really what the whole 4 worlds are about. Stages of independence and self-consciousness. So the farther in the world you go of the 4 worlds, the more independent you feel and the less consciousness of God you feel. But any spiritual world has more of a consciousness of God than this world does. Now, within each of the 4 worlds, there are, and I'm going to call this one, Keter, I'm going to call Chachma. There are 10 sfirot, 10, I always lose the word in English, 10 divine emanations, 10 powers, whatever you want to call them. So in each of the 4 worlds, there are generally 10 powers, 10 emanations, 10 levels, whatever you want to call them. And obviously, each one is lower than the next. So for example, here, the highest one, Chokhmah, what they called Keter, the highest one, Chokhmah, I'll call this one Chokhmah, is going to be the highest. Then it goes, then that's next, then that's next, and that's next, and then there, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. Okay? So if you come from, let's say my soul and your soul both came from the same world, but you came from here and I came from here, even though we both generally came from the same world, I will have naturally less consciousness of God. Okay? So what Tanya basically said here is that what it said here is that the difference between how connected you feel to God naturally, how connected you feel to God naturally, how deep your subconscious connection to God is going to be is dependent upon where your soul emanates from. So we explained that there's like a gestation period, right? Just as when children are born, some kids are born at 6 months, some kids at 7 months, some at 8 months, some at 9 months, right? The later you go, the more they're formed. Now in this world, it's better, right? The later they come out, the better, right? They're more formed. Well, in the spiritual world, in a sense, it's actually, if you want to say, worse if you come out later, because then you're more formed, you're more naturally independent. So souls that come into this world, some of them come straight from the highest world, at the highest level of the highest world, and they come into a soul. They'll be coming from, say, the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation, and they'll from the highest level, the level of Chachma. So those souls will be the most lofty spiritual souls. Then there's some souls which will come from the lowest level of the lowest world. So every soul will have a subconscious spirituality, latent spirituality, subconscious connection to God. But some of those souls' subconscious connection to God will be greater than others. And therefore, when you tap into your spirituality, for some people will be more spiritual than others. And that's what he's saying here. So even though, because of what the patriarchs did, they bequeathed to each and every single one of us this latent spirituality, depending on where our soul is rooted in, meaning where did our soul jump out into this world, that will decide how spiritual our latent spirituality is. So let's just read here what I explained. A higher soul from the higher sphera or world will find it easier to be aware of God and meditate upon his greatness. A soul emanating from a lower location will find it more challenging, which is, by the way, another reason why we can't judge people. Tanya talks about this later, is maybe your natural level of spirituality is a lot greater than the other person's, and that's the way you were born. How can you turn to someone and say you expect them to be like you? The Tanya notes briefly that your soul level can ascend throughout your life. Which, by the way, I just want to say one more thing. That's why I find spirituality is not necessarily always connected to action. In other words, there are some people that maybe do less mitzvahs than me, but when they do a mitzvah, I would say they're feeling more spirituality than I am. And that's just the root of their soul. Versus, obviously, you could say I could put in more work in it as well, but you can also say to some extent it's dependent upon the root of your soul. So some people have a more of a natural spirituality, even if they don't use it all the time. But when they use it, they feel more spiritual, and that's, it's great, good for them. But we all have to work with what we have. So let's continue. Each individual begins life according to his soul's initial level in the sphirot within the four worlds. And then his soul can ascend the sphirot and the worlds during his life, following his good behavior. Sounds like over here that you can go up rungs of spirituality throughout your life. Interesting. Didn't explain that in chapter 2. As the Shar HaGilgulim teaches, Shar HaGilgulim means the gate of reincarnation. Section of Kabbalistic teaching. Every person must rectify the whole spectrum of the Sfirot in Asiya before a soul can receive from Yetzirah. So in other words, you have to go up all 10 rungs of the lowest world before you can get to the second lowest world. Since Yetzirah is greater than all of Asiya. Asiya is the lowest, Yetzirah is the second lowest. Similarly, in order to receive from Bria, that's the next world up, a person needs to rectify every part of his soul from Yetzirah, after which his soul can receive from Bria. It is insufficient for him to rectify only the particular place in which his soul root is grounded. So I'm not fully understanding, and I'm not sure why he went this way, but I don't see it being part of this discussion here. But it sounds like no matter where you're rooted, you can elevate all the worlds and all the sefirot. I'm not sure. I don't know how this came in here. Okay. But let's continue with our main point over here. And while we may not have all the lofty souls, and they are at least from one of the 10 holy sefirot without they are at least from one of the 10 holy sefirot without exception. So he's saying we may not all have the loftiest soul, but we all come from the holy 10 sefirot. So as he says, even the most irreverent and sinful Jews will cause a holy soul to be endowed to their children through their act of conception, at the very least, from the lowest soul level, nefesh of nefesh, from the lowest of the 10 holy sefirot, malchus, from the lowest of the 4 worlds, asiya. This nefesh of malchus being the lowest rung in the sacred world of asiya. I want to point out, he said, even the most irreverent and sinful Jews will cause a holy soul to be endowed to their children. Why am I saying this? People want to know, this is really what makes someone a Jew. What makes someone a Jew is a Jewish soul. You can be very spiritual, you can do lots of great things, but if you weren't born Jewish or you didn't convert, you have to work to get that Jewish soul. It's a very difficult topic often, but this is what it's teaching here. It says clearly that the Jewish soul is inherited. It's an inherited thing, which means Jewish people didn't work in it. People ask me all the time, how is it, it's not fair, right? This person is born Jewish and, I have to work so hard to convert or whatever it is. It's true. What can I say? But it says clearly here, it's inherited. Obviously this is based on the Torah teachings and everything else. This is giving the Kabbalistic understanding of what's going on. That there's an inheritance going on. And of course, if you haven't inherited, you can convert. That's an option as well. But you have to have one of those two things to have it. That's why, people today, someone was emailing me today about they want to convert because they're ethnically Jewish. I said, what does that mean? They said they got a DNA test. Okay, but DNA. I mean, what exactly? What part of your family? In order to get the inheritance, you have to be born, from a Jewish mother, to be endowed to the children this soul. And again, it's not saying someone's Jewish is because they did something better. That's one thing people think. It's not because they did anything better. It's literally by being born. There's a whole discussion today in the modern world all about the privilege. But I was listening to someone saying that don't forget, privilege is also an obligation. That's what people have to remember about being Jewish. It is a privilege to be born Jewish. It's also an obligation. You have an obligation now to also do all the commandments. So yeah, on the one hand, you get inherited this soul, but with that soul, you have what you need to do. People always tell me, Rabbi, I'm not so Jewish. I always tell them, no, what do you mean you're not so Jewish? You're either Jewish or you're not. I always say, you don't do the mitzvahs. Doing the mitzvahs doesn't make you Jewish. Because you're Jewish and you have that godly soul, therefore you need to do the mitzvahs. So, again, this is a very important Kabbalistic, a basic understanding to the general idea of the Jewish soul. We explained here, it was a gift that God gave to the patriarchs and the matriarchs as a gift for their divine service, that their children have an inheritance of this godly soul, whether we work on it or not. All right, let's continue. In summary, while accepting the hierarchy of souls described in the Kabbalah, the Tanya nevertheless democratized, I don't know what that word is, all souls in the sense that they are all rooted in pure divine energy, the 10 holy sefirot. However low a soul's root may be, its direct connection with God will not be severed. All of the patriarchs' descendants merit a soul which in one way or another is rooted in one of the 10 holy sefirot. There are no exceptions. I'm going to highlight that again. There are no exceptions. If you're born Jewish, there are no exceptions. You have to be rooted in the 10 holy sefirot. You might be on the lowest of the lowest rung, but you are rooted there in those 10 holy sefirot. Okay? This provides us with the answer to question C above. How is it possible to inherit love? The answer is, it is not the emotion itself we inherit, but a soul which is predisposed to love God due to its lofty source in the divine sefirot. So this is a beautiful answer. We start off questioning, wanting to know, how can you inherit a feeling? I can give my kids any feeling of anything, except maybe to be scared of me. No, I'm kidding. How do you give a kid's feeling? And then the answer is no. They didn't inherit feeling. They inherited a soul. And by virtue of that soul, as we'll learn, we will have access to certain feelings. So what's the takeaway for today? Well, we're on the path of understanding this inherent love. We already understand where it's coming from and how it can circumvent our mind, because it's rooted in a soul that's inherited to us. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to develop this even more. And I want to just end off with a story that just so you understand this, right? Because you can say, well, people write off other Jews all the time, and it's easy, right? It's easy to say, well, look at this Jew. He's trying to sell Israel down the river, and look at this non-Jew who's so supportive of Israel. How can you say this person is even a Jew? The Tanya clearly says, you're born a Jew, you got that Jewish soul. So I just want to tell you a story. There's a story, someone once came to the 5th Chabad Rebbe, and he told him, I don't understand why you spend so much time with the simple Jews. What do you see in them? They're simple. They don't have much substance to them. What do you see in them that you spend so much time with them? So he didn't answer him. He says, what's your business? He told him, I'm a diamond merchant. So the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, says, okay, show me a couple diamonds. So he pulls out his diamond. So he asks him, show me. Sorry, I must have gone off. So let me just continue. It cut out for a second. So he asks, yeah. So I'm back.
Okay, good.
All right. So he asks him. He says, So he says, show me your diamonds. So he shows him the diamonds, and he's looking at them at the table, and he says, he looks at the biggest one, and he says, that one's probably the most expensive. And the guy says, Rebbe, you don't understand diamonds. It's not the biggest one that gets the most expensive. It's the one that has the most clarity and shines off and this and that. And the Rebbe Rashav, the Finchabar, looks at him and says, I don't know. I'm a simple person. I don't understand what you're saying. This looks big. This looks great. This is the most expensive one. So the man told the Rebbe Rashab, to know the worth of diamonds, you got to know diamonds. You got to be an expert. So the Rebbe Rashab looked at him and says, and to know souls, you got to be an expert in souls. You're not the expert in souls. I'm the expert in souls. So I won't ask you which one's the most expensive diamond, and don't ask me what's the greatest soul. So this is all to say, do I see how the Jew, this person is trying to sell Israel down the river, that they have the godly soul in them? No, I don't see it. A Rebbe would see it. I am not an expert in souls, but what I do know, what we picked up from today's Tanya, is that it's there. And so I guess one message we can walk away is, first of all, don't give up on ourselves, and don't give up on a fellow Jew. Every single Jew has this godly soul that we should never, ever give up on. So I'm going to stop the recording there, and we'll see you again next Tuesday.